something was scratching at my tent at 3 a.m., but when I looked outside, nothing was there. The Appalachian Trail was supposed to be my escape from Rhode Island's cramped hiking spots and overcrowded campgrounds. In the summer of 1989, I decided to follow in my uncle's legendary footsteps, tackling the southern portion of the trail from Harper's Ferry to Asheville. He'd hiked the entire thing back in the 50s and never stopped talking about the magical wilderness waiting to be explored. Armed with nothing but a lightweight orange dome tent and naive courage, I set out on what I thought would be the adventure of a lifetime. Those first few days in West Virginia were brutal. My body wasn't prepared for the constant strain of hiking with a full pack, and I'd never been as hungry or exhausted as I was during those initial nights up in Appalachia. The wildlife stories didn't help either. Timber rattlers that could bite you in your sleep. Black bears that would tear through your gear looking for food. It was probably mostly exaggeration, but intimidating nonetheless. The forest went completely silent. Then we saw the massive wild boar emerge with blood in its eyes. My summer at Virginia Tech was supposed to be about academics and cultural exchange. As a Malaysian student participating in their international program, I'd planned to focus on my studies and maybe make some American friends along the way. Hiking the Appalachian Mountains wasn't even on my radar until my classmates Mia and Jordan convinced me to join their weekend expedition into the wilderness. You can't leave America without seeing real mountains, Jordan had insisted, showing me photos of breathtaking vistas and pristine forests. Mia nodded enthusiastically, adding that it would be the perfect way to experience authentic American outdoor culture. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and despite my complete lack of hiking experience, I found myself agreeing to join their adventure. The preparation was more involved than I'd expected. We spent an entire afternoon at the campus outdoor recreation center, where Tom, our guide, fitted us with proper hiking boots and explained the essentials of backcountry safety. He was the stereotypical outdoorsman type, bearded, confident, full of stories about his wilderness adventures. His easygoing manner and obvious expertise put me at ease about venturing into unfamiliar territory. The Appalachians aren't like the Rockies, Tom explained as we loaded our packs. They're older, gentler mountains, but don't let that fool you. They've got their own dangers. The key is respect and preparation. He ran through a checklist of safety protocols, emergency procedures, and wildlife precautions that seemed almost excessive at the time. The first day of hiking was a revelation. The rolling green hills stretched to the horizon like something from a nature documentary, and the forest canopy created a cathedral-like atmosphere that felt both peaceful and mysterious. My legs ached from the unaccustomed exercise, but the stunning scenery made every step worthwhile. We stopped frequently to take photos and catch our breath, with Tom pointing out interesting flora and sharing bits of local history. By the second day, I was starting to feel more confident on the trail. My body was adapting to the rhythm of hiking, and I was beginning to understand why my American friends were so passionate about spending time in the wilderness. There was something deeply satisfying about moving through the landscape under your own power, feeling connected to the natural world in a way that city life never provided. We were taking a break on a flat rock ledge, sharing trail mix and lukewarm water from our bottles, when everything changed in an instant. I was talking with Mia and Jordan about our plans for the following semester when I noticed the air go strangely still. No bird song, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped moving through the trees. The silence was so complete, it felt unnatural, almost oppressive. That's when we all heard it simultaneously. Something heavy moving in the brush behind us. It wasn't the light rustling of small animals or the gentle swaying of branches in the breeze. This was deliberate movement, something large pushing through the undergrowth with purpose. Tom froze mid-sentence, his relaxed demeanor vanishing instantly. He had been cracking jokes all morning, the kind of overconfident outdoorsman who seemed unshakable in his natural element. But the way he suddenly went quiet, then whispered urgently, "Don't move, don't make a sound," made my blood run cold. His face had gone pale, and I could see sweat beating at his temples despite the cool mountain air. I didn't dare turn my head completely, just shifted my eyes toward the sound. That's when I saw it step out of the tree line, and my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a black bear as I had feared. It was something that seemed worse in many ways, a massive wild boar. The creature was enormous, easily 3 times the size of any pig I'd ever seen. Its dark, bristly hair was matted with mud and debris from the forest floor, and long yellow tusks curved out of its mouth like ancient weapons designed for killing. The animal looked prehistoric, like some beast that had wandered out of a nightmare or stepped through time from a more savage era. It rooted at the ground for a moment with its snout, disturbing leaves and soil, before lifting its head and sniffing the air with obvious intelligence. When those small, dark eyes fixed on that group, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just an animal. There was something calculating in its gaze, something that suggested it was making decisions about what to do with us. I had read somewhere that wild boars could be more dangerous than black bears when confronted. They were known to charge without warning and wouldn't stop until something was dead or they were driven off. Tom's reaction confirmed my worst fears about our situation. His face was rigid with concentration, and his hands were slowly moving toward the bear spray clipped to his belt. Mia's hand was trembling so violently beside me that I thought she might drop her snack bag, the crinkling sound potentially triggering an attack. I wanted to whisper some reassurance to her, but I was terrified that even the sound of my breath might provoke the creature. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like we were balanced on the edge of a knife. Then the boar made this awful noise, a guttural squeal that echoed through the trees and seemed to vibrate in my chest. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, part roar and part scream, filled with aggression and challenge. My legs nearly gave out from under me, and I had to focus all my willpower on staying perfectly still. The animal started walking closer, each step deliberate and measured, its hooves crunching on the dead leaves scattered across the forest floor. When it got within just a few feet of our rock ledge, it shook its massive head from side to side, those deadly tusks glinting in the filtered sunlight streaming through the canopy above. I thought with absolute certainty, this is it. We're going to die here, ripped apart on a beautiful afternoon in the Virginia mountains. The boar studied us for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I could smell its musky scent, see the intelligence burning in its dark eyes as it evaluated the threat we might pose. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it snorted loudly through its snout and veered away from us, crashing back into the undergrowth. Branches snapped and leaves rustled as it disappeared, the sounds fading gradually until the forest returned to its normal symphony of natural noise. The second the creature was gone, Mia let out a sob she'd been holding in, her whole body shaking with released tension. Jordan muttered a string of curses under his breath, still clutching his water bottle so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Tom finally allowed himself to exhale deeply, his shoulders slumping as the immediate danger passed. "That's why you never bring food out in the open. Ever," he said, his voice still shaking slightly. "And that's why we carry bear spray and know how to use it." He was trying to regain his composure, but I could tell the encounter had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. We packed up our gear in complete silence and resumed hiking at a much faster pace than before. None of us dared complain about the increased speed or the way Tom kept checking behind us on the trail. The mood of our expedition had fundamentally shifted from carefree adventure to something more serious and potentially dangerous. That night, at the trail lodge where we'd arranged to spend our final evening, I couldn't stop replaying those terrifying moments in my head. How close we had come to disaster, how quickly our peaceful afternoon could have turned into tragedy. I'd never felt that helpless before, completely frozen in place while nature decided whether we were prey or simply obstacles in its path. The experience taught me something profound about the wilderness and my place in it. Despite all our technology and preparation, we were still vulnerable creatures in an environment that operated by rules far older and more brutal than human civilization. The boar had spared us for reasons I'll never understand, but it could just as easily have decided we were threats that needed to be eliminated. Even now, years later, I can't hear the sound of pigs squealing at a farm or market without immediately flashing back to that guttural roar echoing through the Appalachian forest. Sometimes I wonder if that massive boar was trying to warn us about something even more dangerous lurking deeper in those ancient mountains. Something that would have made our encounter with it seem like a gentle introduction to the real terrors hidden in the wilderness. The mountains had shown me their beauty and their danger in equal measure, and I knew I would carry both lessons with me for the rest of my life. I heard my dead mother's voice calling my name from the Kentucky woods at midnight. Growing up in rural Kentucky, the local church youth group was about the only organized activity available for teenagers looking for something to do on weekends. Our pastor believed strongly in the value of connecting young people with God's creation. So, several times each summer he'd organize retreats up in the Appalachian foothills where we'd spend 3 days hiking, swimming in mountain streams, and participating in outdoor worship services under the stars. Most of these trips were exactly what you'd expect from church-sponsored activities: wholesome, supervised fun, designed to build character and strengthen our faith community. We'd roast marshmallows around campfires, play organized games during the day, and gather in circles each evening to share testimonials about how the natural beauty around us reflected God's love and power. For a kid from a small town where entertainment options were limited, these retreats represented genuine adventure and excitement. But there's one particular trip I'll never forget. Not because of any spiritual awakening or meaningful bonding with my fellow youth group members, but because it included one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life. An encounter that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. Our group leader that year was Brother Matthews, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd grown up in those same mountains before becoming a minister. He knew the area intimately, having spent his childhood exploring every ridge and hollow within walking distance of his family's homestead. During our evening gatherings around the fire, he loved sharing local folklore and stories passed down through generations of mountain families. Most of his tales were harmless, accounts of clever hunters outwitting bears, stories about the healing properties of various plants, legends about hidden caves filled with Cherokee gold. But that particular night, he decided to tell us about something called the Holler Witch, and his normally gentle voice took on a different quality as he began the story. According to mountain folklore that went back over a century, she was a spirit that roamed the ridges and valleys after dark, calling out in voices that sounded exactly like people you loved. Her technique was simple, but devastatingly effective. She would study her intended victims from a distance, somehow learning the voices of their family members, friends, anyone whose call they might be tempted to answer in the darkness. Brother Matthews described her as wearing a veil woven from bark and leaves that completely concealed her face, with long, unnaturally pale hands that could reach through shadows and grab anyone foolish enough to respond to her calls. If you followed the sound of that familiar voice, she would lead you deeper and deeper into the forest until you were hopelessly lost. Then, when you were too exhausted and confused to resist, she would claim you for whatever dark purpose drove her eternal wandering. "The key thing to remember," he said, staring directly into the flames, "is that no matter how much the voice sounds like someone you love, no matter how desperate or afraid they seem to be, you must never answer. You must never follow." His words carried the weight of absolute conviction, as if he were sharing a survival technique rather than an entertaining campfire story. The story was obviously meant to serve a practical purpose, keeping us close to camp after dark and preventing anyone from wandering off alone into potentially dangerous terrain. But I was only 14 years old, and those vivid descriptions sank deep into my imagination like seeds planted in fertile soil. The image of that bark-veiled figure calling out in stolen voices haunted my thoughts as we prepared for bed. Later that night, lying in my tent while my tentmate snored peacefully beside me, I found myself wide awake and anxious. The forest outside seemed too quiet, as if every creature was holding its breath and waiting for something to happen. Even the usual nighttime symphony of insects and nocturnal animals had fallen silent, creating an oppressive atmosphere that made every shadow seem threatening. That's when I heard it for the first time, a woman's voice, low and gentle, calling my name from somewhere beyond the circle of dying firelight. I froze completely, my heart beginning to pound against my ribs. None of the adult leaders would have been wandering that far from camp, especially not at that hour of the night. The voice called again, more insistently this time, and I felt my blood turn to ice water in my veins. It sounded exactly like my mother, down to the particular way she pronounced my name when she was worried about me. But my mother had been killed in a car accident 2 years earlier. She was buried in the cemetery behind our family church, and there was absolutely no way her voice could be calling to me from the Kentucky mountains. Yet the sound was so perfectly accurate, so heartbreakingly familiar, that for a moment I almost believed some miracle was occurring. I nudged my tent mate frantically, desperate for confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind, but he remained dead to the world. Either he was an incredibly deep sleeper, or the voice was somehow meant only for my ears. I was trapped there alone with my terror, staring at the thin nylon wall that suddenly felt as protective as tissue paper. Then I heard footsteps beginning to circle our tent, slow, deliberate steps that crushed dead leaves and small branches with each measured pace. Around and around the footsteps went, like a predator studying its prey and looking for the best angle of attack. The pattern never varied. 7 steps, pause. 7 more steps, pause, continuing in a perfect circle that gradually moved closer to the tent walls. "Please come out, honey," the voice whispered, and the resemblance to my mother's speech patterns was so exact that tears started streaming down my face. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I need to tell you something important before it's too late." Part of me wanted desperately to unzip that tent and run toward the voice. The possibility that somehow, through some cosmic mercy I couldn't understand, my mother had found a way to reach me across the barrier of death was almost overwhelming. The grief I thought I'd learned to manage came flooding back with devastating intensity. But another part of me, some deep survival instinct that operated below conscious thought, kept me frozen with terror. Brother Matthews's words echoed in my mind. No matter how much the voice sounds like someone you love, you must never answer. The rational part of my brain knew that whatever was circling our tent, it wasn't really my mother. The voice continued its pleading for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sometimes it sounded angry, demanding that I stop being foolish and come outside immediately. Other times it took on a heartbroken tone, explaining how much it hurt to be ignored by the child it loved so much. The emotional manipulation was sophisticated and relentless, targeting every vulnerable spot in my psyche. Finally, mercifully, the footsteps began to fade into the distance. The voice grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the normal sounds of the forest returning to life. Crickets resumed their chirping, an owl called from somewhere up the ridge, and gradually the oppressive silence lifted like a weight being removed from my chest. When morning came, I was exhausted and emotionally drained, but also profoundly relieved to see sunlight filtering through the tent walls. I told one of the older kids about my experience, hoping for reassurance that I'd somehow imagined the entire episode. Instead of the rational explanation I was hoping for, he just nodded grimly and said, "Yeah, you don't want to answer if you hear her. That's how she gets you." Then he walked away as if discussing supernatural predators was just another normal part of mountain life, leaving me to wrestle with the implications of what had happened. I learned later that my tent mate had actually heard everything too, but had pretended to sleep through it, too terrified to move or speak. We never discussed the incident directly, but sometimes I'd catch him staring at the tree line with the same haunted expression I probably wore. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize that night in dozens of different ways. Maybe it was stress and grief manifesting as auditory hallucinations. Maybe it was some kind of practical joke played by older kids or adults who wanted to scare us. Maybe it was nothing more than the combination of suggestion and imagination working on a 14-year-old mind that had been primed by scary stories. But none of those explanations feels adequate when I remember the perfect accuracy of that voice, the deliberate pattern of those circling footsteps, or the way the entire forest seemed to participate in whatever was happening. It's been decades since that night, but even now, when I'm outside after dark and the woods fall unnaturally quiet, I feel like I'm still waiting to hear that voice again. Sometimes, in my weakest moments when grief and loneliness threaten to overwhelm me, I wonder what would have happened if I'd answered her call. Would I have found some impossible reunion with the mother I'd lost? Or would I have simply become another missing person that the mountain swallowed whole, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak for the people who loved me? I suppose I'll never know for certain, and perhaps that's for the best. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, especially those that involve the spaces between life and death, love and terror, the natural world, and whatever darker forces might be lurking just beyond the edge of human understanding. Dr. Sarah Chen had been studying isolation psychosis for years, but she never expected to become her own case study. The Appalachian Trail was supposed to be therapeutic, a way to overcome her crippling anxiety after the accident. She'd equipped herself with every safety device imaginable, including a small camping mirror clipped to her shoulder strap. At first, the mirror brought comfort. Quick glances showed empty trail, swaying branches, normal wilderness life. But on day 4, something changed. A figure appeared in the reflection, tall, gaunt, wearing military surplus. When she spun around, nothing, just trees and silence. Stress hallucination, she told herself, applying her clinical training. Hypervigilance causing false pattern recognition. But the figure persisted, always at the periphery, never quite real enough to photograph or document. Her rational mind battled with primal fear as she pushed herself harder, faster down the trail. The psychological warfare was methodical. The figure maintained perfect distance, appeared only when she felt safe, vanished when she investigated. Her sleep became fragmented. Her appetite disappeared. She started talking to herself, then arguing with herself about what was real. By the 5th day, exhaustion had shattered her defenses. When she finally saw him clearly, that mockingly casual wave from behind the oak tree, she realized the horrible truth. The figure wasn't following her. It was leading her somewhere specific, somewhere she was always meant to go. She ran anyway, crashing through undergrowth until she reached other hikers. But even as they offered comfort and rational explanations, she caught glimpses in their campfire reflections. Multiple figures now, all watching, all waiting. The mirror had shown her the truth. She was never alone in these mountains, and she never would be again. Local legends spoke of him in whispers around Appalachian campfires. The trail walker, a Confederate deserter who died lost and starving in these mountains over 150 years ago. Some said he was searching for his way home. Others claimed he was collecting souls to ease his eternal loneliness. Emma had dismissed such stories as campfire nonsense until she saw him in her mirror. The antique camping mirror had belonged to her grandfather, a veteran who'd hiked these trails for decades before his death. "It shows you what you need to see," he'd always said cryptically. The first sighting was brief, a shadow that shouldn't exist, moving wrong against the natural flow of the forest. But as days passed, the encounters became bolder. The figure solidified, revealing period clothing, unnaturally pale skin, and eyes that held the depth of centuries. He never appeared directly, only in reflections. Water puddles, car windows, her tent's metallic surfaces, anywhere that could catch and hold an image, he materialized. The rules seemed ancient. He couldn't approach the living world directly, but reflective surfaces were doorways he could peer through. Emma researched frantically at trail towns, discovering newspaper clippings from the 1800s. Missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, always in the same Virginia section where she now walked. The pattern was consistent. People vanished after reporting a helpful stranger who offered to guide them to safety. When she finally saw him wave from behind that oak tree, she understood. The gesture wasn't threatening. It was an invitation. He was offering to show her the way, just as he had offered countless others. The mirror had made her visible to him, and now she had to choose: run and risk his pursuit forever, or follow and discover what happened to all those who accepted his guidance. The other hikers at the shelter couldn't see him, Marcus, but Emma could still catch his reflection in their water bottles, waiting patiently for her decision. For 3 years, he'd stalked lone hikers, studying their patterns, learning their weaknesses. The isolated wilderness provided perfect cover for his activities, and missing persons cases were easily dismissed as hiking accidents. But this time was different. This hiker had a mirror. At first, it didn't matter. He was skilled at staying hidden. moving through the forest like smoke. He'd track his targets for days, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The small camping mirror should have been irrelevant, just another piece of gear to be found later in an abandoned pack. But she kept looking, constantly checking her six, spinning around at shadows, changing her route unpredictably. The mirror had made her paranoid, and paranoia was making her dangerous to his carefully laid plans. Marcus adapted, staying further back, using terrain more carefully. But the game had changed from hunter and prey to a chess match. Every move he made, she seemed to anticipate. Every approach he attempted, she evaded. The mirror had given her an advantage he'd never encountered before. Hours turned to days. His usual quick strike had become a marathon pursuit through hostile terrain. He was burning through supplies, taking risks, making mistakes. The hunted was becoming the hunter, and Marcus found himself enjoying the challenge despite the frustration. When he finally revealed himself behind that oak tree, close enough to strike but choosing instead to acknowledge the game they were playing, he saw something in her eyes that made him smile. Fear, yes, but also determination. She was learning to be a predator too. The wave was a salute between worthy opponents. Let her run to the other hikers. Let her think she was safe. Marcus had time, patience, and the entire wilderness to work with. This hunt was just beginning.